Thank you very much, Rupert, for making it. I appreciate that you are not 100%, yet you've consented to find this time, and I really value this. Um, I'll jump straight into insurance, and your book is
Mm.
fascinating. It drew me straight into the chapter on insurance. And thank you very much for
Yeah,
mainstreaming insurance into the climate space. But my question is, we allude to now all the financial services as the money pipeline, and it's the money
yeah,
pipeline which is fueling the climate breakdown. And generally, insurance is low down in the priorities of, if I may use the phrase, blame game. Um, you, on the
yeah.
contrary, see it differently. So, you moved it up, and I'm glad you did that. But
Mm.
let's hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so in terms of the blame game, of course, there have been people moving into this space quite a lot in recent years. We've got Insure Our Future, for example. There's the work that the Sunrise Project has been doing. I think that this is excellent stuff. And I think that in that way, the insurance sector is worth questioning and criticizing in ways that are kind of similar to the questions and criticisms that have been raised in relation to investors and bankers and pensions and so forth. I guess what I think is particularly interesting and sets insurance apart is that insurance has other roles which are not shared by anywhere else in the money pipeline, and which
Hmm.
some of which have, if you will, a more positive dimension. So one of those roles or potential roles is that insurance is partly about understanding what is happening and what risks we're exposed to. I mean, it's literally about that, right? It's impossible without that. And that's not really the same if you're talking about investors or bankers or pensions. Of course, all of these parts of the finance sector, they have to be concerned about the risks that they're taking with their money or their clients' money or whatever it is. So of course it's always a dimension, but it's not focal, it's not central in the way that it is for insurance. Insurance has no business model unless it carefully calibrates what risks people, including the insurers themselves, are exposed to, and how to share and pool and cover and potentially reduce those kinds of risks, right? So obviously it's not difficult to see where this is going. Insurance is more directly allied with risk analysis than any other part of the money pipeline. And this is so relevant to the times we are now moving into, with continually increasing climate risk and other related risks that we could talk about, nature risk and other parts of the poly crisis as well, artificial intelligence, etc. So one thing which that in turn points to is that it's likely that in terms of what is known by insurers and actuaries and so forth, or at least what should be known by them if they're doing their job
Hmm.
properly and covering their asses properly,
Hmm.
they've probably got more to tell us, more to tell the world, if you will, about climate risk and about how that's actually going to play out in people's lives and in economies and so forth, than again any other part of the money pipeline. So one of the invitations, and in the written interview that we've already done, it's one of the things, of course, I talk about. One of the implications of that is that they need to find ways of telling the world more of what they know, especially when what they know is disturbing,
Right.
right? Because our situation is disturbing. So that's one thing connected with that, but it's not exactly the same point. It's another way in which insurance is kind of special. Is the stuff, and again we talked about this in the written interview, around the looming danger of uninsurability. So we're talking here about black swan risks and grey swan risks and, if you will, the green swan stuff as well. But we're also just talking about the way in which, and we've seen this starting to happen recently, haven't we, Praveen? The way in which insurers in some parts of the world are withdrawing coverage, and they are saying, no, this sector is this houses in this state, whatever it is, it's happening more and more. This is not insurable anymore, and what we need to look ahead to is the potential future in which this happens so much that there is no insurance business. So there's a sense in which, more directly than any other part of the money pipeline, again, insurance faces an existential risk here, which presages and preludes the existential risk that faces us all. Now, what that leads to in turn is the thought that there is an intriguing commonality of interest more directly between insurance and citizens or activists, if you will, climate activists, anyone concerned about climate action, than, again, is the case with any other part of the money pipeline. This might sound a strange thing to say. Insurance companies are not thought of in the same breath as Greta Thunberg or whatever, but quite literally, there is an interesting and non-trivial sense in which the interests of insurance are allied more directly with those of us, which ultimately is all of us, who are concerned about the climate situation, than any other part of the money pipeline. And finally, and again, this is related, but again, there's something which is distinct about it. Insurance is the way that society, preeminently modern society, handles our risk exposure, our vulnerability. And there's something, very scary about vulnerability, and there's something very kind of beautiful about it. We are inherently vulnerable beings. We're all capable of being killed or whatever at any moment, or of losing everything that we hold dear pretty much at any moment. Insurance systematically gives us a safety net to cope with that kind of vulnerability. It is the way that society thinks about these things, especially in a capitalist-style market-based system. And that means that it has relevance to ordinary people, again, virtually all of us, as a way of thinking about the situation that we are moving into. So in a way, the point I'm making here might sound esoteric, but in another way, it's very straightforward. It's a point about kind of thinking and about communications. If you want to get ordinary people to think about their lives, their exposure to risk, their vulnerability, how they deal with that, how they reduce that exposure, etc., insurance is the most natural way into that, from out of the, once again, the entirety of the money pipeline and much more besides. And obviously, part of what we're trying to do in the Climate Majority Project is exactly that, right? To get people to make that connection. So that's a way in which insurance kind of feeds into the interests of citizens at large as part of what we call the emerging climate majority.
Fantastic. So I'll come to the Climate Majority Project at in the latter part of our conversation. But before that, the origins, and those origins are important because that continues to churn the engine and reinforce the old ways of the world, which need to be shared. So, for instance, the London market, the preeminent mecca of insurance, as we've all known it, has been a cockpit, if I may call it, of colonialism and imperialism. As a student of history, and you as a professor of philosophy, I just want to touch slightly on that space and then see how it is continuing to be a hindrance. So that energized the Industrial Revolution. And Lloyd's became a handy tool. While this is not just the Lloyd's, but Lloyd's as in terms of symbolism, insurer of sea trade, with which came slave trade. The fossil fuel fitted into it in this playfield very nicely as a critical element. Now, dismantling this old order is like getting someone into a de-addiction mode.
Yeah.
So don't you see a bit of a challenge when it comes to these enmeshed positions and situations?
Yes, that's a beautiful understatement, Praveen. Thank you. A bit of a challenge, yes. Yeah, look, I don't have much to add to what you've said there, really. It's a hell of a challenge. It's a huge challenge. Our society is addicted to fossil fuels. We're addicted to production and consumption and growth. These things are all related to one another. They have deep historical roots, which you've gestured at. The insurance industry is kind of knitted through a lot of this. It's going to be very hard to make that change. If we are going to avoid an uncontrolled civilizational collapse, that kind of change is going to have to be made. And so that's what takes us back to the previous question, really, and to thinking about some of the ways in which absolutely there is grounds, obviously, for criticizing the insurance industry in terms of the way that it's enabled the fossil fuel industry, for example. At the same time, we have to avoid overdoing that criticism for two reasons. One, well, this is just what we should expect commercial, corporate, profit-driven companies to do. And if we want them to change that, then we need to find a way that it's possible for that to be changed. And that is mostly not going to come from within the sector itself, that internally, as it were. That's clear. It could come from a re-regulation of finance and insurance in particular, and indeed of the business world at large. But one of the things we say in the Climate Majority Project is pressing for such regulation is exactly what any responsible corporate citizen or business should now do, because it's the only way you avoid a permanent race to the bottom. And the other reason why we shouldn't just be critical, but should look proactively to how the situation may be changed, comes back again to our previous question and to the ways in which it really could be, that insurance starts to move from mostly being on the side of the bad guys to mostly being on the side of there being a future in which there continues to be an insurance industry, a future in which the world is not uninsurable, and so forth.
Right. Yeah. So connected to that is basically, it's not that the insurers or the big reinsurers are faced with an existential crisis. Not too long ago, you're still relatively a younger person than I am, but I saw it in my early days in the insurance industry, how Lloyd's nearly died. And, it was asbestos, which
Yes.
was a long tail phenomenon, which almost
Yes.
ripped apart the balance sheets and all the finances of Lloyd's, and it had to be rescued. And the fossil fuel withdrawal syndrome, if I may use
Yes.
again
Good.
a phraseology from addiction, it's got to be traumatic. So they are not going to give up. And even if they give up, there will be huge challenges. So, there has to be a lot of hand holding in the process. So, like the Lloyd's, the Net Zero Insurers Alliance, signatories kind of they you think understand the consequences of what they are headed for the choices they have made?
Yeah. Well, so let's firstly take your historical parallel, asbestosis.
Yep.
Yeah, and what we're dealing with here is something which is orders of magnitude bigger.
Right.
In terms of the way that insurance is going to be increasingly exposed to unpredictable and potentially huge claims. in terms of the way that there are going to be temptations to withdraw coverage, which ultimately means having a smaller and smaller insurance industry and probably a smaller and smaller potential set of viable economic activities for people. What this means is that if you want to have a future at all, and in particular, if you want to have a future which includes having insurance, then sooner or later, this bullet has to be bitten. Yeah. Now, the Net Zero Insurance Alliance was a sort of attempt to do that. It has, as we discussed in our interview, it is our written interview, it has basically fallen apart under pressure from Republican, anti-ESG, etc. forces in the United States. This is a very sad state of affairs because well, for two reasons. Firstly, it's kind of laughably ironic that the Net Zero Insurance Alliance came under pressure in that way, because it was clearly inadequate in what it was trying to do, not, overly adequate. The critics said, oh, it's going way too far. It's behaving like a monopoly. It's trying to do things which businesses shouldn't try to do, and so forth. When the reality was, it was way off the pace of what was actually needed to be done. Right. So that shows you, how far away we are from the kind of place where we need to be. But the other related point to make here is that obviously, if insurers were really clear about the things that you and I are talking about today, then they would be determinedly finding some way either of defending the NZIA or of creating something else more effective in its stead, or something like that. To reiterate the central point here, if we don't have something which takes the place of the NZIA and goes a lot further and is a lot more effective, that comes from within, or more likely gets imposed from without, but I would say hopefully with an initiative from people within insurance trying to push in that direction. If we don't have something like that, then we will go down the path of increasing uninsurability, and we'll just go further and further down that path until there is nothing left. And that, of course, is, again, why you and I are talking here today, because in the Climate Majority Project, we have therefore been trying to gather together some people in and around insurance who recognize this reality. And we are now talking about forming some kind of group, probably initially a kind of private group, nothing as kind of high level as the NZIA was, just kind of bringing people together from insurance, actuaries, and so forth, who understand that the kind of things you and I are saying are roughly right, and that something has to be done about it. So we're thinking of calling this little group the Future of Insurance. And obviously part of the point is that there will be no future for insurance unless some change of path is taken. And putting it more positively, insurance could make a huge difference in the kind of ways we were talking about earlier to the chances that there will be a future more generally. And that is, well, an incalculably important prospect. So that's what we're trying to do. And anyone who's watching this who feels aligned, I would ask them to get in touch. You can get in touch with either of us, but certainly you can get in touch with me via the Climate Majority Project, climatemajorityproject.com, and we will be assembling this group in 2024.
Perfect. Having said that, this is kind of, I can allude to this by saying, this is the kind of disruption insurance will also face. And you already kind of covered that up. But yes, I mean, insurance, what it means in the developed world, if I may use that phrase, in, say, the global north, and what it means in the global south are two different things. And, you have more dependence on the state. So while private economies, increasingly privatizing economies like my own country, are trying to increase the insurance penetration, and the regulators are very bullish. I wish them luck. The point is that, just before you are able to take off in the chosen space of growth and penetration, you are going to hit a wall. And that wall is obviously uninsurability, as you very nicely
Yeah.
kind of articulated. And at the end of the day, whether it's the large economies of the US, UK, and the OECD countries, or the growing economies like my own country, or the unfortunate countries which are smaller and much more vulnerable, which would be subject to the loss and damage kind of coverage, would all meet the same destiny, which is, no insurance or very little insurance. And
Yeah.
the whatever safety net that uh, in different forms, shapes, and sizes that exists, even that disappears. So that sounds very dreadful, doesn't it?
Well, indeed, yeah, and I think it is worth thinking these things through quite deeply. When we talk about insurance, for people who work in insurance, this will, in a certain sense, seem like it's their whole life, or at least their whole livelihood. It might also seem, in the global north, as if it is in some sense an optional extra, or maybe you can take the risk of doing without it. Well, see how that works out sooner or later when things go wrong. It's obviously not likely to work out very well. But there is this even more fundamental sense of insurance, which you were getting at, I think, in your question, which is having just basically any kind of way of having a safety net, something to rely on, some way of being bailed out when things go wrong. So this is how, for example, in a country like the UK, we pay national insurance so that we get covered for sickness and so on and so forth through the National Health Service. So in that sense, you can think of the state as the ultimate guarantor of insurance in the UK as much as in India. And of course, what we're ultimately talking about, if we talk about a situation where either insurance companies fail or they withdraw cover, is a situation where all one will have to fall back on is states, and they will in that sense be the ultimate insurance, if you will, the insurers of last resort. But of course, in the situation that we are moving into, with continued climate deterioration for a long time to come, with the gross inadequacy of the COP process and so on and so forth, it is going to become harder and harder for states to fulfill that function. And that is a fact that people have to start to wake up to. So ultimately, we might put it this way, an uninsurable world means a world where in the end, there really is no safety net at all. And that's surely not a world that anyone wants to be in. So what this all amounts to saying is, yeah, we need to think about insurance not just as a commercial thing, but as it is in the north in some respects, and it certainly is often in the south, as a function which can be provided either commercially or by states, and as a function which is degraded by graver and graver climatic damage or whatever it may be. So yeah, this is another way of saying that in the end, there is no alternative but to get serious about tackling the climate crisis. So yeah, so ultimately, what this means is we have to find effective ways of tackling the climate crisis. Insurers, commercial insurers, are kind of canaries in the coal mine with regard to this crisis.
Indeed.
And so I'd say again, anyone watching this who is professionally involved in some way in insurance and who wants to step up to this particularly crucial plate, please get in touch with me, get in touch with us, And let's see if we can talk together and work together about how insurance may be able to play this function of being the canary in the coal mine and make sure that all the coal mines get shut down and so on and so forth, to vary the metaphor.
Perfect. I think this reinforces all that you and I have also exchanged in our written interview, and all the conversations we've been having in the early days of the CMP, and let's hope we can build on that. And I'm also hoping that the length and the breadth of this vision encompasses not just my country, but much of the larger world, which all
Yeah.
of it will be impacted if we go off track. And looks like uh, we are not left with much time.
Yes,
I'll keep talking to
absolutely.
you, Rupert, on that, and hopefully we'll have these opportunities to revisit where we are and what have we got to do, how do we change gears, and what else do we need to mobilize. I think this also need to go into to the mainstream, people who don't really understand, uh, the serious implications of climate change on insurance. And insurance is becoming scarcer. Insurance is becoming pricier. But then they always believe there is a cycle which will probably correct it as things get better. But things are not going to get better unless we do something
Yeah,
really dramatic and drastic.
yes,
So thank you so
yes,
much for all these lovely insights. Scary indeed, but it's best we accept them as they are. But one last thought from you before we conclude today.
yeah, yeah. Well, Pravina, all I would like to add is thank you for making this possible. I think it's an exciting, necessary dialogue. I think that it's very late in the day, as you say, but it is absolutely not too late to do something meaningful about this. And what could be more meaningful than doing something about this, especially if this is how one earns one's living? Wouldn't it be great for insurers to go from being just a kind of neutral figure in our society, or in some ways a figure which can be justly criticized, to being not zeros, as they will be if the insurance ceases to exist, but to being a kind of heroes. And that is ultimately what we have in mind here.
Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed all these interactions, and I look forward to many more, and something really meaningful to come out of it. Thank you very much, Rupert.